We are continuing our series about comparing different testing mechanisms for the novel coronavirus. Today we will talk about antigen testing. So let's first go back. So this is the virus. So you have the RNA, the genetic material inside that gets sort of translated into all the stuff it makes on the outside, all the proteins. We call them antigens because they provoke a response in our body. So why are we testing? Well, there's two different reasons. One is you want to know who has it. Somebody may be ill and you want to figure out what the cause is. Somebody may not be ill, but you worry that they may become ill. They will get sick from some disease. The other reason that's important is to know infectiousness. And so this is where a lot of this stuff is coming into play, this point of care testing. This is a big machine used in a lab, a PCR machine. Wonderful machine, right? So the thing is, when we check the genetic material like the RNA, we do something like PCR, we do direct probes, it's like matching your DNA from a crime scene. If it gets it, very good, very accurate. But when we're checking other stuff like on the outside, maybe it's just you forgot your glove there and you're like, hey, is it my glove? Is it somebody else's glove? I can't really tell because on the outside they look sort of similar, right? And really, the key is if this is different, then it's a different thing, even though the outside may look similar. Whereas the outside looks similar, the inside may not be. An important thing to point out is the spike protein, how it attaches, and the envelope, sort of what encapsulates it. So these big machines they use in the lab, they're very good, right? Well, they're sort of expensive. This is a used one. I couldn't find out how a new one is, but they're tens of thousands, maybe more. And they do the best test. A lab does wonderful testing. But you have to get it to the lab. It takes time to get it to the lab, get the results back. Lab often batches this, so maybe they run it once every evening. And if you get it at 2 a.m., well, you missed the cutoff for yesterday, so I guess you'll have to wait till tomorrow. It takes a lot of staff. These are people who are not manual laborers, shall we say. They don't get paid minimum wage. They got to know how to run this equipment. It's quite complicated. And when you have a point of care machine like the, little Abbott machine that we've seen, the idea is that it's portable. You can take it anywhere. You don't need any expertise. I looked to see nasopharyngeal swallowing on dummies, and apparently there's no book for that, even though they have books for everything else. And so if you think about it, right? If you want a good burger and you go through McDonald's and you get it through the drive-thru, it's quick, it's easy. I don't know that you're expecting a good burger for $5 or whatever you paid for it. If you were, I'd say you're sort of stupid. I mean, this is a Napa Valley Burger Company, pretty sizable quantities of meat and stuff like that. Decent burger. Had it there before when I went with my friend to Marin County before everything closed down. So there's trade-offs, obviously, to using these little machines, and I think that's what you have to understand. There's always trade-offs, right? I mean, you don't use not as good tests because they're as good. You understand portability is a trade-off, right? Like if something's smaller, it may not be good as something that's bigger. I mean, unless there's something different, right? Presumably a 4-liter versus 3-liter versus an 8-liter engine are different. I mean, one guzzles more gas, it's more expensive, but it's going to be more powerful. So let's look at all these tests that are listed, okay? So PCR isothermal amplification, this is the Abbott test, which is unique. But basically, you see, other than isothermal, everything is serologic, which is antibody testing, versus PCR. There is no other test. So, a recap of our different types of tests. So, genetic data testing means RNA testing, means they'll use a term like PCR in the label. So, finds insignificant amounts of genetic code, meaning you have the virus. If it's there, it's there. You test the outside, like we're saying, it may look the same, but maybe we're a little bit mismatched. Maybe the glove doesn't actually fit, even though we found it at the scene of the crime. So the concept of immunoassays is pretty simple. So you have an antigen. This is your virus particle. It binds to an antibody, and the antibody has an enzyme or a color or something, and it changes. It boom, it brightens up, it fluoresces, changes color. That's how you tell you've found this guy, because you can't actually see this guy, but the antibody can, and his signaling molecule will tell you you found this guy. The methodology I talked about on my other slide, but the idea is that they set this up so it flows laterally. So your reagents with your antigen, with the virus particles, possibly sort of flow along, and if they bind here, they line up and they lighten up. And you'll see a line here because they've all sort of lined up, and because they're all compacted close together, you'll see them light up. And this is what it looks like. So, we already have a fast test by Abbott. Why would we use anything else? Right? Well, again, maybe it's about portability, but we got that from Abbott. Maybe it's about, ease of use, but we got that from Abbott. Maybe it's about cheaper. So, do you ever wonder about this idea of you pay for what you get, or you get what you pay for? The idea is interesting, right? It's a novel idea, shall we say, for the novel coronavirus. Well, actually, it's not a new idea. We have a lot of rapid tests already. We have the test for the flu. We have the test for strep throat. They're known to have poor sensitivity. As a doctor, we all know this. If it's positive, wonderful. If it's negative, well, we're not really sure. In the US, actually, if you do a strep throat on a child and it's negative, you actually run a culture just because you don't want to miss it. So let's look at Shenzhen Bioeasy. This is the company that made those tests that Spain said were faulty. So they talk about immunochemical point of care methodology, right? Time resolved fluorescence immunoanalyzer. I've never heard of them, but let's look a little bit about it. Oh, great. They've been making products for a while. Okay. Diabetes, inflammation, So it doesn't seem like they make any tests that actually do any pathogens like bacteria, viruses. Well, gotta make money, right? Gotta, use your other older models and adapt it to something new. Okay, so what tests do they have? Okay, let's see. The coronavirus for the antibody, rapid, very good. The antigen test kit, okay. And so this is F for fluorescent immunoassay. So it's this picture back here where if it matches, then it fluoresces. So you see a line here. So this is actually the top is the control. So this should light up no matter what. If it doesn't light up, the test is invalid. And the bottom, it should light up if you have the thing of interest. So the virus in our case. So yeah, so they also have a PCR test. Interesting. So they make us sort of all things, right? Again, right? You want to have a wide range of tests for different people who have different amounts of money, different amounts of expertise. Okay, let's see. Okay, test procedure. So this is how we do it. Very good. They're going to tell us what we do. Okay. This is the PCR test, right? But I guess you need sort of a, machine here. So that sort of is a little bit more difficult for most people. You don't have a PCR machine. So let's go to run through what their test looks like. So they have a little ID chip to tell the machine what test you're trying to run, what you're testing for, to give the results. And so the nasal swab, okay, they're going to show you how to do it. Measure the distance from the nostril to the root of the ear and mark it with your finger. So that's obviously not standard English, and given they're based in China, I'm guessing that they didn't have, a proper English speaker translate, shall we say. The real key is to get a good test, you need a good sample, right? And so it's nasopharyngeal, right? So basically the technique is you just poke it till the end. The patient will flinch. One study was saying tears is the proper response. No, you've got it in the right place. Okay, but they say it this way, so you measure, and so you know how this is on the outside, as you can see, and then you stick it inside so you can guess where it is. Okay, I'm not sure that's a valid technique, but they try to explain it. And then rotate. 30 seconds, 15. Did you get that? I didn't get that. This is talking about a sampling cup, right? This is sort of strange. This is talking about, you know, when you do it, you have to mix it up, right, to elute a sample. Oh, that's pretty complicated. Wait, and then you have to do something else? So you take the sample from this, and then you have a dipper, and then you take it and you drip into here. And then you have to wait 10 minutes. And then you run it, and it'll give you a result. Just to emphasize how poor their English is, then completely immerse the swab head into the test tube, cover the tube, and rotate about 10 times or squeeze 5 times by hand to ensure that the sample on the sampling swab is fully eluted into the sample extraction solution. I'm sure Google Translate would think this makes sense, but to someone who speaks English, this may not make very much sense. And remember, this test was to be used in Spain, and they don't even speak English as their first language, which actually I don't know if it makes it easier or not to, you know, read somebody else's poor English. So one issue I have is the nasopharyngeal versus oropharyngeal. There have two methods, but we know that before many companies have only validated it on nasopharyngeal, but they said you could use it on other methods. Okay, let's see. They'll give us some more information as to nucleic capsid protein, right? So this is a website of a company that sells this stuff, and it's telling you some information. Let's see if we get some more. Oh, okay, wonderful. You know, because I was wondering, you know, we all know that the flu test, the rapid strep throat test is not as good, but the sensitivities, how good is this? Because I don't really know. There's not many other tests of this type out there, right? So, wow, they're not bad. Sensitivity, 100%, specificity, 91, 92%. Oh, that's pretty good, right? Comparing it here. Okay. So the positive judgment threshold is 0.005 nanogram. What exactly is that? I've never seen that, right? I mean, maybe they mean level of detection or limits of detection, but nanograms, what is a nanogram? What are you weighing here, right? Sometimes they talk about genome equivalents, but it's all a little bit confusing to me looking at this website. Well, let's look at it here in terms of the way they came to this, because you need a study to base up your sort of how you're doing this, right? So, because nobody's really done this before for the coronavirus, so obviously there's got to be a study to show that this is valid. And this is actually their study. I wonder if it's similar to this, where they talk about their sensitivity specificity. So, you know, total 144, 157. Okay, so they're talking about how they're doing testing. And then, so, you know, they compare, let's say, oh, here's the little picture, right? Okay, very interesting. So, you know, I don't have the full details for this, but I'm going to presume it's some variant of this testing. So if you look here, right, CT is cycle threshold value. So it's a cutoff we're using for being positive or negative, greater than 40 or less than. So here they saw that, you know, in terms of sensitivity, it's only 68%, not very good, right, when they use this value of 40, right? So here you see how it's sort of on a graph. This is just sort of the raw data. This is using 40. And here is their beautiful new graph. So basically they just erased everybody between 30 and 40. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so here we go with erasing everybody between 30 and 40. Oh, it's 98%. Very good. So they got a lot better values if they erased the values between 30 and 40. So they use less than 30 as a positive and greater than 40, but what happened to the values in between? I'm not really sure. So what is this cycle threshold anyways? So this is a cycle, right? So as we know, the more cycles you run, the more material you get, right? So the idea is how much original RNA was there in the sample. because the more cycles you run, the more RNA you could get. And if it's so low, it might be just an error, right? So they usually use 40. And so here is where our cycle threshold CT would be. And so this is where you call it a positive versus a negative, right? Because once you go above that, you're like, okay, it's meaningless now. I was trying to look to see what numbers we use, and there's different ways of doing it because the WHO actually targets different parts of the RNA compared to the US test. But they use the cycle threshold of 40. Okay. What about here? The European guidelines are saying, well, if they have the virus, then it should be pretty high. So, maybe 35. But repeat testing could be considered if it's higher than 35, as in if it's negative because of that threshold. The US definitely uses 40. This is put out by the CDC. So definitely uses 40. And then here, there's another report, and it uses 37, right, as a cycle threshold. And here, they're using 35, 36. So the idea is that it's not one clear number. And here, there's another comparison of tests, right? It's not one clear number, but the idea is you got to choose a number here somehow, right? This is one number between, sensitivity and specificity curves. You can't choose one number here and one number here and have this whole gray zone. I mean, that's not how the way things work. So this is actually a report on testing different commercial RT-PCRs. This is the gold standard. They actually found that they have different results. If you look here, they're not all the same in terms of performances. 10 out of 13 to 16, 12 out of 16, 11 out of 16, 10 out of 16, right? So actually they vary in their performance, and they said some cycles are different, right? One machine could find that cycle 35, one machine finds that cycle 38. Well, you're testing actually, and you have the same amount of genetic material, so maybe their cycles are also somewhat different. So cycles could be different, but I think the principle still stands. What they did here was just sort of erase a whole bunch of stuff to make their numbers look better. From 68 to 98%. And I don't really see justification for this. Their justification was that, well, if they're sick, they should have a lot of this. But, especially if you're using it nowadays for the purpose of knowing who may be contagious, but they're more asymptomatic, I think you want to know if they actually have it versus, whether they're only really sick and they have it. So Spain's situation was they're using nasopharyngeal, so we don't have to worry about the oropharyngeal being a not good route. I don't know who was actually doing the testing, whether it was skilled people or not. They had to manually read it, so it was more like looking back at this little thing, right? Which makes it a lot harder than having a machine read it. And then so the company said they'll send them some new kits that can be machine read, but since they still don't work good. But they said 30% sensitivity. Even the BAT test here was sort of they were saying 68%. How did they get that? Well, in the real world, it's not as good as testing in a laboratory on a research study. People aren't trained as well as researchers, and then, maybe their sort of standards aren't as high, there's more contamination, there's all these things. But I think the basic gist of it is that, we know this test, the Bioeasy antigen detection test, is not going to be as good. We thought it would be pretty good based on their reports on how they were selling it. 92% sensitivity. Spain got 30%. I'm going to guess it actually went up when they got the new kits, but it was still not good. And so they said we're going to sort of rely on NAT tests, right? PCR tests sort of, and antibody tests. So what do you comment about Bioeasy? Can you generalize about Chinese companies? Well, some Chinese companies are making PCR tests. Actually, in this sort of study where they commented, BGI is a Chinese company. They said these tests are all fine. So obviously it depends on the company, right? I think this company doesn't necessarily have expertise in doing testing for viruses or bacteria. And then the other thing is, I don't know in terms of what information they presented for getting it CE certified. But it does seem like, if they actually let on that, their sensitivity was actually 68%, they wouldn't have approved it. The real thing is, I don't know, right? It looks to me that they might have been misleading in terms of their reports. But, people bought the test because it's cheap. You sort of get what you pay for. I think we'll really know when Sona Nanotech will come out with their own antigen-based test because it's a spike protein and we can compare it. Maybe the nucleocapsid is just not good enough to do for this. So this is sort of a deep dive into the idea of, Bioeasy, the Shenzhen-based company, sort of how testing works, why their test was actually pretty poor, why I'm more in agreement with Spain that their test is actually pretty poor, that even though there could be some error with how they're running it, that is just not a great test to begin with, and then the technical operator error probably made it worse.